I couldn't believe my eyes. There they were, lined up on that folding table at the garage sale. My childhood trophies, my countless victories in spelling bees, soccer matches, and art contests, all sold for $1 each. My hands shook, and my chest tightened as I stared at the yellowed ribbons dangling from their cheap bases.
How could she?
How could my mom, the one person I thought would cherish my memories, just toss them like old magazines? Every medal, every plaque, every hard-earned trophy that had once filled my room with pride and reminded me of every sleepless night, every practice, every ounce of effort, was now a bargain on a folding table for strangers to gawk at. And that's when it hit me. Enough. I wasn't going to let this slide. She needed to see the consequences of what she'd done. What would you do if your own mother sold your most cherished memories for $1? Would you scream, cry, or plot your revenge? Comment below and share your story. I want to hear how you'd react in my place. I'm Madison Harper. Growing up in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, I was a kid who wore my achievements like badges of honor. My bedroom shelves were stacked with trophies and ribbons from every school contest imaginable, spelling bees, soccer tournaments, even piano recitals. They were more than objects. They were symbols of my dedication. My mom, Diane Harper, was always a bit distracted, lost in her own world of garage sales and bargain hunting. She'd brag about her good deals to friends while I was quietly practicing for my next competition. I never thought she'd cross the line of basic decency until that Saturday morning. I had been running late for work and decided to swing by the garage sale down the street when I hadn't even known she was hosting. That's when I saw them. My trophies. My little victories, each labeled with a sticky note. $1. A feeling of betrayal slammed into me harder than any soccer tackle ever had. I tried to convince myself I must be mistaken. Maybe these were old duplicates, I thought. But no, they were mine, and she knew it. My mom, the woman who should have protected my memories, had sold them off like trinkets. The anger bubbled inside me like a kettle about to blow. I sat on the curb, staring at the table, my hands wrapped around an empty coffee cup, shaking uncontrollably. I remembered each of those trophies, the nights I had stayed up until midnight finishing school projects, the early mornings spent on the soccer field while she slept in. And now, some stranger would own pieces of my childhood for less than a latte. I tried talking to her that evening, her nonchalant shrug making my blood boil. They were just old things, Maddie. I needed the money, she said casually, scrolling through her phone. I wanted to scream, to throw something at her, to make her feel even a fraction of the heartbreak I felt. But the words got stuck in my throat. I realized then that confrontation wasn't enough. She didn't understand, and worse, she didn't care. Night after night, the humiliation gnawed at me. I replayed the moment over and over, imagining the neighbors picking through my trophies, maybe even mocking my tiny victories. I felt powerless, angry, and sad all at once. But as I lay in bed one night, a spark flickered in my chest. I would get those trophies back, or at least make her understand what she had done. This wasn't just about objects anymore. It was about respect, pride, and making her see that my childhood wasn't hers to sell. I started watching her routines, the way she arranged garage sales and chatted with neighbors. Each weekend, she'd proudly display her bargains, completely oblivious to the fact that I was observing every detail. I bought a few identical trophies online, cheap replicas that looked similar but had slightly altered labels. I also talked to my childhood friends, asking casually if they'd ever seen my trophies pop up in any neighborhood sales. Nobody had, which told me they hadn't gone far. The garage sale was likely the only stop. And that's when I started sketching my plan. It was clever, subtle, and satisfying. I didn't just want to retrieve my trophies. I wanted her to feel the sting of underestimating what those little pieces of metal meant. I whispered the plan to myself as I lay awake at night, imagining the moment she would realize her miscalculation. Revenge wasn't about me being cruel. It was about reclaiming what was mine and making sure she never dismissed my achievements again. The next garage sale, I arrived early, disguised in oversized sunglasses and a baseball cap. I positioned my replica trophies subtly on the table, replacing a few of her originals I'd managed to borrow from neighbors who had bought them unknowingly. Each sticker read $100 each in big, bold letters. As Diane began setting up her items, she noticed immediately. "Wait, these aren't," she stammered, frowning at the price tags. Neighbors, passing by, began asking questions. "Are these your old trophies?" one woman asked, pointing at the replica with the $100 tag. Diane's face went pale as she realized her oversight. She had literally undervalued my childhood memories. I watched from a short distance, heart pounding with both adrenaline and satisfaction. Her expressions shifted from confusion to panic as she tried to explain herself. "They were just old things," she muttered weakly. I smiled internally. She now understood the value, not just the monetary but the emotional weight, of what she had tossed aside so casually. It wasn't malicious, cruel revenge. It was poetic justice. Each replica sold, each remark from neighbors highlighting the worth she'd ignored, felt like a small triumph. And in that moment, I felt the anger and betrayal melt into empowerment. She hadn't broken me. I had turned her ignorance into a lesson she would never forget. Revenge, I realized, isn't always about hurting the other person. It's about reclaiming your dignity and asserting boundaries. I learned that allowing someone to dismiss your achievements unchecked only feeds their disregard. By standing up, even indirectly, I reminded my mom, and maybe even myself, that my worth isn't tied to her approval or her perception of value. It also taught me patience and subtlety. I could have lashed out, yelled, or stormed the sale. But that would have satisfied a momentary rage, not created lasting impact. Instead, I created a situation where the lesson was clear, public, and inescapable. And I learned the importance of memories. Trophies, ribbons, and medals are tangible symbols of effort, of growth, of who we are. Protecting those symbols isn't vanity, it's self-respect. Through this experience, I also understood that even flawed family members can inadvertently teach us about boundaries, resilience, and cleverness. Most importantly, I recognized that empowerment comes from reclaiming your story. I had been the protagonist of my childhood victories, and now, as an adult, I was the author of how those memories would be honored and remembered. Weeks later, life returned to a kind of normal. Diane was quieter during our conversations, occasionally glancing at me with a mix of guilt and newfound respect. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. The lesson had been learned. I had reclaimed control over my memories and demonstrated that neglect has consequences. I rearranged my room, displaying the trophies I managed to recover and integrating new achievements. Each piece was a reminder of both my childhood victories and my adult resourcefulness. Friends who knew the story often laughed with me over the poetic justice, and even strangers at future garage sales recognized the cleverness of the plan. I also noticed a shift in our relationship. It wasn't perfect, and some old habits lingered, but the dynamic had changed. I felt stronger, more confident, and more in charge of my own narrative. No longer would I allow my past, my achievements, or my emotions to be casually dismissed. In the end, I discovered a deeper sense of self-reliance. The experience reminded me that while family can disappoint, we have the power to reclaim our dignity, memories, and joy. I was no longer a passive participant in my story. I was the one steering the course, armed with wisdom, pride, and a little poetic justice. Sometimes revenge isn't about hurting the other person. It's about finding yourself again, reclaiming what's rightfully yours, and asserting that your memories and efforts have value. My story isn't just about trophies. It's about self-respect, patience, and cleverness in the face of betrayal. If you've ever been undervalued or dismissed, I want to hear how you handled it. Would you have plotted a subtle revenge or confronted the person directly? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories of resilience, cleverness, and reclaiming what's ours. Sometimes, standing up, smartly and confidently, is the sweetest victory of all.